Captain Olivia Hartley had always been drawn to the unknown. Space wasn't merely a frontier, it was an endless sea of questions waiting to be answered. After years of deep space missions, she had learned to trust her instincts, even when they whispered of danger. But nothing, none of the nebulae, none of the black holes, none of the cosmic storms, had ever whispered like the void ahead. The Alpha-Aseran Sector was a black blot on every star chart, a place no human vessel had dared explore until now. Earth's space agencies had monitored it for decades. The sector was devoid of activity. No signals, no celestial bodies of note, just endless, quiet darkness. And that's what made it so intriguing. After all, the most haunting mysteries lay in the silent places where nothing should exist. The void, as it was called, drew Olivia and her crew like moths to a flame. The celestial voyager was cutting through space, moving steadily towards that yawning abyss. Olivia sat in her captain's chair, her eyes glued to the endless black beyond the cockpit window. The stars, once bright, were now distant pinpricks, dimming the closer they got to the sector. She couldn't shake the feeling that something in the void was watching them, an unseen presence lying just beneath the darkness. "Captain, we're approaching the outer boundary." Lieutenant Marcus Hale's voice broke the silence. He stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the control panel, his features etched with concentration. A brilliant engineer, Hale had been Olivia's right hand for the last 2 missions. She trusted him more than anyone on the crew. Olivia tore her eyes away from the view outside and turned to him. "Any changes in the signal?" Hale hesitated, his fingers tapping nervously at the console. "It's still there, still the same frequency. But it's getting clearer. It almost sounds like an Earth-based transmission." "That's impossible," Olivia said, though she didn't believe her own words. The transmission had started as faint, indecipherable noise, a static pulse barely registering on their equipment. Yet the deeper they moved into the sector, the more distinct it became. A pattern began to emerge, one that rattled them all. A signature reminiscent of the lost Apollo 23 mission. 50 years ago, Apollo 23 had embarked on a routine survey of the same region, a mission that should have been simple, nothing more than an exercise in data collection. But within a week of entering the sector, the ship vanished, along with all its crew. No distress calls, no wreckage, no sign of life. Space had swallowed them whole, and now, somehow, Apollo 23 was calling to them from the dark. The uneasy tension in the cockpit mirrored the growing anxiety spreading among the crew. "I don't like this, Captain," said Corporal Jenna Reyes, who was manning the navigation systems. "We shouldn't be here. No one should." Olivia understood her crew's fears. The void felt unnatural, a place untouched by time or the laws of physics. But they had come to explore, to seek answers, not to turn back at the first sign of trouble. "We keep going, but stay sharp. If anything feels wrong, we pull back." The decision wasn't one she made lightly. Years of experience had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now they were screaming that something was waiting for them on the other side of this sector. Something they weren't meant to find. The minutes dragged on as they ventured further into the darkness, and the star field behind them grew fainter, swallowed by the void. Soon, the stars themselves seemed to disappear entirely, leaving nothing but the black of space. Olivia couldn't remember the last time she had seen space this empty. The quiet was suffocating, as if the universe had stopped breathing. Suddenly, the ship's instruments beeped in unison, startling the crew. A signal, much stronger than before, pulsed through the ship's systems. Hale's hands flew over the controls, his face pale. "Captain, the signal, it's coming from directly ahead of us." Olivia leaned forward in her chair. "How far?" "5 clicks, maximum," Hale replied. "It's almost like it's waiting for us." The words sent a chill down her spine. "Waiting?" She pushed the thought aside. "Prepare the external cameras. Let's see what's out there." The crew worked in silent efficiency, the atmosphere thick with dread. When the cameras activated, the screens in front of them flickered to life, revealing a sight none of them expected. A ship. But not just any ship. The jagged, ancient lines of Apollo 23 were unmistakable, floating lifeless in the void. Its hull was battered and covered in the dust of space, but intact. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. "It's been out here all this time," she whispered. "How is it still here?" Reyes muttered, her voice shaking. "It doesn't make any sense. They searched for months, years even." "Get closer," Olivia ordered, trying to keep her voice steady. Her mind raced. How could this ship have remained untouched for so long, drifting in a sector where nothing existed? The questions piled up, but answers seemed out of reach, as though the void itself was mocking them, daring them to delve deeper. As the celestial voyager approached, Olivia could feel the air grow heavier, pressing against her chest. It wasn't the lack of oxygen. No, it was something else, something unseen, like the weight of countless eyes observing their every move from the unseen corners of the void. She suppressed the urge to look over her shoulder. Suddenly, a sharp crackle burst through the comms, and a voice, distorted but unmistakably human, echoed through the cockpit. It was a voice they all recognized. "This is Commander Alan Jameson of Apollo 23. We're not alone out here. Something is inside the ship with us. It knows we're here. I don't think..." The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by the endless hiss of static. The crew sat frozen, shock and fear creeping into their bones. "That was impossible," Hale breathed. "That message, Commander Jameson's voice, it's from 50 years ago. How is it still playing?" Olivia couldn't answer him. Her mind spun, her heart racing. Something had happened to Apollo 23. Something far worse than they'd ever imagined, and now it was waiting for them. With one last look at the black expanse outside, Olivia made her decision. "We're docking." The docking procedure with Apollo 23 was eerily smooth, almost as if the ghostly vessel had been waiting for them to arrive. Captain Olivia Hartley's stomach churned with a mixture of dread and curiosity as she watched the connection between the celestial voyager and the derelict ship finalize on the control panel. A soft metallic clunk echoed through the ship as the airlock sealed. The sensation of being tethered to this relic of a doomed mission felt wrong, like tying yourself to a tombstone. "We're locked in," Hale said, his voice flat. He didn't look up from his console, his face pale under the dim cabin lights. None of the crew spoke. The sound of their breathing seemed too loud, a sharp contrast to the oppressive silence outside. Olivia nodded and stood from her seat, adjusting her spacesuit. She could feel the weight of her crew's eyes on her, all waiting for her next move. "Suit up," she ordered. "We're going over. Reyes, you'll stay here and monitor the external systems. If anything changes, anything, You let me know immediately." Corporal Jenna Reyes's lips tightened into a thin line, but she nodded, visibly relieved that she didn't have to set foot on Apollo 23. Her fingers danced over the controls as she ran diagnostics and prepared to monitor their vitals remotely. The rest of the team, Hale, Dr. Anita Sorensen, and Specialist David Grant, followed Olivia to the airlock in silence. The docking tube that connected the two ships groaned as they made their way through it, the sound an unsettling reminder of how fragile everything was in space. Outside, the void pressed against them, a silent witness to their intrusion. Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, not by cameras, not by technology, but by something older, something vast and unknowable. The airlock to Apollo 23 hissed as it cycled open, revealing the dark, cold corridor of the lost ship. The temperature was much lower than expected, a chill that clung to the bones. Olivia could see her breath fogging in front of her visor. The lights of their suits cut through the darkness, illuminating only what lay immediately before them, leaving the shadows dense and impenetrable. "Readings show no signs of life," Dr. Sorensen said quietly, her voice a barely audible whisper through the comms. "But there's something odd. I'm picking up faint energy signatures, fluctuations. They shouldn't be there." "They're there," Hale added, his voice tense. "It's like the ship is still drawing power, but not from any source I can identify. It's wrong." "Stay close," Olivia ordered. "No one wanders off." They moved cautiously through the narrow corridors, the once vibrant interior of Apollo 23, now a tomb. Walls that had once held the hum of human life were now silent, cold, and indifferent. Panels were scorched as though a fire had ravaged parts of the ship, but there were no bodies, no signs of the crew, just emptiness. The further they went, the stranger the atmosphere became. Time seemed to stretch out, as if the space around them was distorting. Olivia checked her wrist monitor again and again, but the readings never matched up. Minutes felt like hours, and the ship seemed to stretch on endlessly in every direction. Then they found the suits, dozens of them, stacked neatly along the walls of what had once been the main control room. Each suit was laid out as if the person wearing it had simply evaporated, leaving behind only the empty shell. The helmets were cracked, the visors frosted over, and each one had a nameplate. Olivia's heart froze when she read the first name, Commander Alan Jameson. "It's like they just stepped out of their bodies," Sorensen murmured, kneeling beside one of the suits, examining it closely. "There's no sign of trauma, no blood, nothing. These suits should be filled with corpses, but it's like they've been vacuum sealed, and the people just disappeared." Grant stepped back, unease etched across his face. "Where the hell did they go?" "This isn't normal, Captain. We need to get out of here." "Not yet," Olivia replied, though every fiber of her being screamed for her to leave. Something kept her rooted in place, some strange force pulling her deeper into the ship. She couldn't abandon this mystery, not when they were so close to understanding what had happened. Hale moved toward the control console. "Maybe we can pull some data from the black box or logs, find out what really happened." He tapped a few keys on the cracked screen, and to Olivia's surprise, it flickered to life. Static filled the air, a garbled mess of broken signals and corrupted data. but in the chaos of noise, one voice rang out clearly, the same voice that had haunted them through the comms. "This is Commander Alan Jameson of Apollo 23. We're not alone out here." The rest of the message disintegrated into static again, but there was no mistaking it. They had just heard the voice of a man who had been dead for 50 years. "Captain, we need to leave," Grant insisted, his voice cracking. "We shouldn't be here. There's something wrong with this place." "Wait," Hale said, his face pale but determined. He was frantically pulling more data, trying to make sense of the scrambled logs. "There's something here. Something they didn't want anyone to see. I think it's encrypted. Give me a few more minutes." Olivia felt her head swimming, her thoughts becoming disjointed. The air in the ship felt heavier, thicker. She glanced at her wrist monitor again and saw the oxygen levels were fine, but it didn't feel right. The whispers had started again, faint at the edge of her hearing, as though something was trying to speak to her from across a vast, yawning distance. And then she saw it, a shadow, just at the edge of her vision. It slithered across the wall, a fleeting mass of darkness that moved with an unnatural fluidity. Her breath caught in her throat and she turned quickly, but it was gone. "Did anyone else see that?" she asked, her voice shaky. "See what?" Sorensen replied, looking up from her work. "A shadow. I saw something." Grant swore under his breath. "Captain, we're leaving now. I don't care what Hale thinks he can find. We're not staying here another minute." Before Olivia could respond, Hale's console flickered violently, and the lights around them began to dim. A low hum filled the air, resonating through the ship like the groan of a giant creature awakening from a deep sleep. The ship itself seemed to come alive, vibrating under their feet, and the whispering grew louder, more insistent. Olivia's blood ran cold as a new figure appeared on the monitor, a face distorted, unrecognizable but unmistakably human. Its eyes were wide, hollow, staring into theirs with a dreadful hunger. The hum grew louder, vibrating through their bones. Hale's fingers flew over the keys, desperately trying to shut it down, but nothing worked. The entire ship seemed to be collapsing in on itself, the air becoming thicker and more oppressive with each passing second. "Move," Olivia barked. "Everyone get back to the ship now." They ran, stumbling over debris and pushing through the dense, suffocating darkness. Behind them, the hum turned into a roar, a terrible, deafening sound that vibrated in their skulls as the entity in the void began to wake. The corridor twisted and stretched before them, and for a terrifying moment, Olivia wasn't sure if they were running in circles or if the ship itself was warping around them. Her vision blurred, the world spinning as if reality was unspooling like thread. Then, suddenly, they were back at the airlock. Reyes's voice crackled through the comms, frantic. "Captain, we're picking up massive energy surges. What's happening over there?" "We're coming back. Seal the hatch as soon as we're in," Olivia shouted, practically shoving her team through the airlock. Once they were inside, the celestial Voyager, the feeling of the entity's presence lightened, but it never truly disappeared. As soon as they were all aboard, Olivia slammed her hand on the emergency seal button, cutting the connection between their ship and Apollo 23. Reyes was pale, shaking at her console. "Captain, what happened?" Olivia didn't answer. She couldn't. All she knew was that whatever had consumed Apollo 23 was still out there, waiting, watching. And it wasn't finished with them yet. Back aboard the celestial Voyager, the air seemed lighter, but the oppressive weight from the derelict ship clung to Olivia like a shroud. Her mind raced, replaying the encounter over and over. Empty suits, strange shadows, the whispering voice of Commander Jameson, long dead but somehow still lingering in the darkness. Whatever had happened aboard Apollo 23 wasn't finished, not by a long shot. The crew was shaken. Marcus Hale, usually calm under pressure, was pacing the control room, muttering about the encrypted logs and fragments of data he had downloaded. His eyes had taken on a wild, restless look that worried Olivia. Reyes sat stiffly at the helm, her hands gripping the controls too tightly, while Dr. Sorensen hovered nearby, glancing nervously at the screens that displayed flickering static and nonsensical readings. And then there was Specialist Grant, standing near the viewport, staring into the void. His silence disturbed Olivia most of all. "I can still hear them," Grant whispered suddenly, his voice so low that it barely carried across the small space. Olivia turned to look at him, her heart skipping a beat. He hadn't spoken since they had fled Apollo 23. "Hear who?" Olivia asked cautiously, stepping toward him. His gaze remained fixed on the emptiness beyond the ship, the infinite stretch of cold, dark space that lay ahead. "The crew. The ones we couldn't find." His voice was distant, as if it was coming from somewhere far beyond the confines of the ship. "They're not gone. They're out there, in the black." Olivia felt a chill creep up her spine. "Grant, no one survived Apollo 23. We need to focus on getting out of this sector." But Grant shook his head slowly. "You don't understand, Captain. They're not dead. They never left. The void, it has them. It keeps them." Olivia's stomach twisted. Grant wasn't making sense, but deep down she knew something was terribly wrong. The void wasn't just empty space. It was alive, awake, and it had claimed Apollo 23 and its crew. And now it had set its sights on them. Behind her, Hale was working furiously at his console, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to piece together the fractured data. "Captain," he called out, his voice strained, "I think I've got something. There's a pattern in the energy surges we've been picking up. They're not random. The energy pulses, they're in sync with the signal we've been tracking." Olivia frowned. "You mean the signal from Apollo 23? Hale nodded. "It's not just a distress call, it's something else. I think it's a response. Like it's answering a call from somewhere deeper in the void." Reyes let out a nervous laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Answering a call? From what? There's nothing out here but darkness." Hale didn't respond. He didn't have to. The silence that followed was thick with the weight of an unspoken truth. The same truth that Olivia had felt ever since they'd entered the Alpha-Aseran Sector. The void wasn't empty. It was watching, waiting. "Captain," Sorensen said, her voice breaking the tension, "we need to leave. Now. The longer we stay, the more erratic the readings become. There's something out there, and it's affecting the ship, affecting us." Olivia knew she was right. The temperature inside the ship had dropped steadily since they had left Apollo 23, and strange malfunctions were cropping up. Systems that had been stable were now glitching, and the lights flickered with increasing frequency. But more than that, Olivia could feel the presence of something looming just beyond the edge of perception. It was as if the void was slowly closing in around them, pressing in from all sides. She turned to Hale, who was still fixated on his console. "Can we break out of the sector? Plot a course back to known space?" Hale didn't look up. "I'm trying, but something's wrong. The navigational systems are acting up. We're getting interference, like a magnetic field, but there's nothing here that should be causing it." "Nothing natural," Sorensen muttered under her breath. A sudden piercing alarm cut through the air, causing everyone to jump. Reyes scrambled to check the instruments. "Captain, I've got something on the long-range sensors. There's something out there." Olivia's pulse quickened. "What kind of something?" Reyes shook her head, her eyes wide. "I don't know. It's big, and it's moving toward us." The word sent a jolt of terror through the crew. Olivia rushed to the viewport, her eyes scanning the empty space outside, but all she saw was darkness. For a moment, she thought the sensors were malfunctioning, a glitch in the system caused by whatever anomalies were plaguing them. But then she saw it, a shadow, impossibly large, emerging from the void. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, as if it was drifting through the fabric of space itself, but there was something deeply wrong about it. The shape was unnatural, shifting and amorphous, like smoke in water. It didn't have a defined form, yet it exuded a sense of overwhelming presence, and it was coming closer. "What the hell is that?" Hale whispered, his face pale. "It's not a ship," Sorensen said, her voice trembling. "It's not anything we've ever seen." Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know what it was, but she knew one thing with certainty. They had to get out of here. "Hale, get us moving, now." "I'm trying," Hale snapped, his fingers flying over the controls. "But it's not responding. The ship, it's like something is holding us in place." The shadow continued to approach, growing larger with each passing second. Olivia's mind raced. Every instinct she had screamed for her to flee, to put as much distance between them and that thing as possible. But the ship wasn't moving. It was as if the void itself had latched onto them, refusing to let them go. The air around them grew colder, the lights flickering violently now, casting the room in a strobe of shadows. The whispers returned, louder this time, filling the air with fragmented voices, familiar voices, the crew of Apollo 23, calling out to them, pleading for release. And then, in the midst of the chaos, Grant's voice cut through. "We need to face it." Olivia turned to him, her mind reeling. "What are you talking about?" Grant's eyes were wide, almost feverish. "The void. It's not just space. It's alive. It's always been alive. It's been feeding on us, on everything that enters this sector. That's why the ships vanish. That's why Apollo 23 disappeared. The void absorbed them. It's absorbing us." Reyes shook her head in disbelief. "You're not making any sense. This is insane." But Olivia could feel it, the truth in Grant's words. The void wasn't just a place. It was a presence, a vast, unknowable entity that had been waiting in the darkness for millennia, feeding on the life that wandered too close. And now, it had awakened. Hale slammed his fists against the console in frustration. "We have to get out of here. We can't face it. There's no way to fight something like this." But Grant was already moving toward the airlock, his hand hovering over the control panel. "It wants us. It's already taken part of us." "Grant, don't!" Olivia shouted, rushing to stop him. But she was too late. With a press of a button, the outer airlock opened, and a blast of cold, empty space flooded the cabin. The shadow was right there, pressing against the thin barrier of the ship, its shifting mass roiling like a living storm. The whispers grew louder, deafening now, filling their minds with the voices of the lost. Grant stepped forward, his face eerily calm. We have to give it what it wants." Before Olivia could reach him, the shadow surged forward, enveloping Grant in a wave of darkness. His scream was brief, cut off as the void swallowed him whole. For a moment, the rest of the crew could only watch in horror as the darkness writhed and pulsed, growing larger, feeding. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the shadow retreated, shrinking back into the void. The airlock sealed, and silence fell once more. Olivia stood frozen, her mind racing. Grant was gone, swallowed by the void, just like the crew of Apollo 23. And yet, the ship had been released. They were free. But Olivia knew deep down that they had only delayed the inevitable. The void had awakened, and it wasn't finished with them yet. The silence after Grant's disappearance was suffocating. Captain Olivia Hartley stood frozen, her body trembling, staring at the airlock that had sealed itself once again. The shadow, the vast, unknowable presence that had consumed him, now slithered back into the void as though it had never been. And yet, it left a piece of itself inside them all. She could still hear Grant's voice echoing in her mind, his last words spoken with such certainty. "We have to give it what it wants." But what did it want? What did the void hunger for, aside from their very existence? Olivia's breath came in shallow gasps, her heart pounding in her chest. The truth, the horrible, undeniable truth, was beginning to sink in. This was no accident, no mere anomaly in the fabric of space. The void, it, was a living, conscious thing, an ancient force older than stars, and it had been waiting for them all along. Waiting, watching, hungering. Her crew was down to 3, herself, Hale, and Sorensen, and even they were coming apart at the seams. Rhea's body lay motionless in the corridor, her mind shattered by the overwhelming presence that had invaded their thoughts. They hadn't saved her. They hadn't saved anyone. Olivia's hands shook as she turned to the others. Hale was muttering under his breath, his wide eyes glued to the console, still trying to make sense of the senseless. Sorensen, usually calm and composed, had a distant look in her eyes, her mind unraveling under the weight of what they had seen. None of them would make it out. Olivia knew that now. The ship groaned around them, the hull creaking like the bones of a dying beast. Systems were failing, one by one. Lights flickered erratically. The temperature had plummeted, and their breath fogged in the freezing air. But worse than the cold, worse than the failing systems, was the feeling. The oppressive weight of the void pressing in on them, suffocating them with its endless presence. There was no escape. Not now. Hale broke the silence with a laugh, a sound so brittle and fractured that it sent a chill down Olivia's spine. "It's funny, isn't it?" he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "All the technology, all the training, all the science, and none of it matters. None of it was ever going to matter." "Hale," Olivia began, but he cut her off, his voice rising in pitch. "We were never supposed to leave Earth. Don't you get it, Captain? We were never supposed to see this, never supposed to understand. The universe wasn't made for us. We're just ants crawling across its surface, thinking we matter. But the void, it knows better. It sees us for what we are, and it's going to wipe us out, just like it wiped out everyone before us." Sorensen closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "He's right, isn't he? We're not getting out of this, are we?" Olivia didn't answer. She couldn't. The truth was too heavy to speak aloud. They weren't leaving. Not alive. A sharp crackle broke through the comm system, a burst of static that made them all jump. Then a voice, hollow, distorted, but unmistakable. "This is Commander Alan Jameson of Apollo 23. Can anyone hear me?" Olivia's blood ran cold. Jameson, his voice, again, always there, trapped in the endless loop of time, like a warning that had come too late. Or maybe it wasn't a warning at all. Maybe it was the void speaking through him. We're not alone out here," the voice continued exactly as it had before. Something is inside the ship with us. It knows we're here. I don't think..." The message cut off abruptly, replaced by static. The same broken transmission that had lured them into the sector, into the maw of the void. Olivia's hands clenched into fists. She should have listened to her instincts. She should have turned back the moment they crossed into this cursed place. But it was too late now. Too late for anything. "We can't outrun it," Sorensen said, her voice barely audible. "We can't hide. It's already inside us." Hale's fingers twitched on the console, his face pale and drenched in cold sweat. "We should send a signal," he said, almost to himself. "Maybe Earth. Maybe someone out there can hear us. Maybe..." Olivia shook her head. "No one's coming. No one's going to hear us." Her voice was hollow, devoid of the command she once held with such confidence. "We're too far out, and even if they did hear us, what could they do? This thing, this void, it doesn't exist in a way we understand. We're nothing to it." For a moment, they all sat in the frozen stillness, the terrible weight of their fate sinking in. Olivia looked out the viewport again. The void was there, vast and endless, more than just empty space. She could feel its presence in her bones, in her mind. It was closer now, closing in, like a predator ready to strike. But not quickly, not violently. It wanted to absorb them, piece by piece. Then came the whispering again. It filled the cabin, voices overlapping, too many to decipher, but familiar. Jameson, Grant, Reyes, the crew of Apollo 23. All those who had come before and all those who would come after. They were all part of it now, part of the void, and soon they would be too. Hale's hands were trembling violently as he clutched the edge of the console, his eyes wide and unblinking. "I can hear them," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I can hear them inside my head. They're calling for us. They're waiting." Olivia's chest tightened. The pull of the void was growing stronger, like invisible tendrils reaching into her mind, tugging at her consciousness. It was no longer a question of if they would be taken, but when. They couldn't fight it. They couldn't escape it. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but there was no steadiness left. There was only the dark, empty expanse that beckoned them deeper. Sorensen spoke next, her voice soft and resigned. Maybe this is what it wants, to consume, to become. Maybe the universe is built on this cycle. Maybe it's how things end. Olivia glanced at her. "We're not going to just give in." Sorensen gave her a sad smile. "I think we already have, Captain. We're just waiting for it to finish." The lights flickered again, plunging the cabin into brief darkness. The void pressed closer, its presence so thick now that it felt like it was crawling beneath their skin, in their very blood. Olivia could feel the edges of her thoughts dissolving, fragmenting, as if the void was slowly erasing who she was. "Captain," Hale whispered, his voice trembling. "It's time." Olivia closed her eyes. In the stillness, she let herself feel the vastness around them, the crushing emptiness of space that wasn't empty at all. The void wasn't just a region of space, it was everything. It had been waiting for them for this moment, and now it was ready to take them. The ship shuddered violently, and a deep, resonant hum began to fill the air, vibrating through the metal hull. The sound grew louder, deeper, until it felt like it was coming from inside their bones. The walls of the ship seemed to warp and twist, as if reality itself was unraveling. And then it came, the shadow, the void. It poured into the ship, flooding every corner, every space, swallowing the light, the air, the crew. There was no escaping it now. Olivia's last conscious thought before the darkness consumed her was that the void had never truly been empty. It had always been waiting, and now it had won. In the infinite silence that followed, the void drifted through space, carrying with it the echoes of those it had claimed. Another ship would come eventually, another crew, hungry for knowledge, blind to the ancient, endless maw that lay beyond the stars, and the void would be waiting, as it always had, ready to consume again. The stars flickered once more before they too were swallowed by the darkness.